Good evening, guys. A little bit blurry at the minute. Um, I just finished paying for this camera, yeah, and then I smashed it. I dropped it, and I got smashed the front part of it. The camera that faces you as you look at it. Because I watch snooker now. That's kind of more. It's a bit more boring snooker, isn't it? It's not really about personalities and stuff. It used to be. At one time, you had your Belfast boxing and blues, alright? Let's just get that clear from the outset. And, you had your Alex Higgins back in the day, like, you know what I mean? You had your Jimmy Whites, like, these guys were heroes, working class heroes. But what did they have to show for it, What did they have to show for it? To succeed in the realm, right, of snooker, you have to be boring, don't you? Like even Ronnie O'Sullivan had to sort of dull himself down a bit in order to be successful, at snooker. And it's not fun, is it, playing snooker? But occasionally you have to fire in a couple of frames. There's an easy connection there to make with Eddie Hearn's dad, right? Barry Hearn. It's quite an interesting character. I'm sure you'll agree. Having begun with Steve Davis and all that, he sort of preyed on a young, naive Steve Davis who didn't really know anything about money or potential earnings and such, and much the way in the old days, a lot of boxers were taken advantage of, and a lot of musicians were, particularly black musicians back in the days, it's an age-old tradition in itself. I kind of you have to rate Barry Hearn to a degree as well, because he makes no apologies. He doesn't come out with a song and dance and say, well, oh, Stephen, I made sure Stephen seen every penny that he deserved. And of course, I started out on the stage and all that there. He is good at Barry Hearn, like, you have to hand it to him. And it must be difficult for Eddie Hearn there, you know what I mean? That's that right old shadow that his dad's cast there. But, when they played snooker as kids, like, Barry Hearn was no longer a kid by that time, but Eddie certainly was, 6'3" by the age of 11 or something like that. I don't want to get too personal, by the way, about anybody, least of all myself, and not some boxing promoter or any other online media figure. Don't want to get too personal. But the basic crack was, I really should have made it like an allegory, like Jesus, I am not Jesus. Neither is Barry Hearn, and neither Eddie Hearn. But he never let him win. He never let Eddie win. It's like if you're every place's grandkids, you've got to earn every red you put. You better earn it, because I'm giving nothing away today. It's an interesting old story, isn't it? Like the Hearn dynasty, like it is quite interesting. And I mean, you can sort of go down the road of saying, well, we're the working class and all of this and that, and these guys have money and we shouldn't have any sympathy for them whatsoever. There may be some truth to that, but you've got to grant people their humanity, in my book anyway, which is a very long book. It'll take you ages to read it. You better just take my word for it. But what it seems to me like what Eddie Hearn when her and Junior started to sort of come to the fore. I think that's correct. And come into his own. I suppose Barry Hearn stepped back out of boxing. Maybe that was the first time in his life. It's like, I'm gonna, I've had my day in the sunlight. He's had a right few days in the sunlight, Barry Hearn, you would imagine, and you're like, he looks like a guy who's enjoyed his life, like. And you see more than one YouTube comment, from some anonymous boxing or snooker fans saying, I love an night on the Stella with Hearn, It's quite silly, like, but it is interesting, man. It is interesting because it's relatable, and it's sort of like a trope, of men or women that have famous fathers or fathers that have achieved a lot, and so they live in their father's shadow. And all men experience that to some degree. We live in our father's shadow. Some dads don't cast that large shadow. And others have been giants in their own lifetimes. Paul Kossoff, he was the guitar player for Free, who were a great band in the 60s. Like probably one of the better sort of blues rock groups. Of those days. His father, I believe, was a very famous actor, stage actor, and stuff like that. And that really freaked him out, I think. And so he was dependent on all sorts of drugs and things like that. Because it had an effect on him, So what it comes down to is, if you're playing snooker, it's not like you jump in the boxing ring and you can do a bit of showboating and this and that. You don't see so much of that. Even old Dennis Taylor there, who's local enough to where I'm from originally, he waited until the match was won, before he started all that old nonsense. And Higgins, for, all of his, beloved sort of everyman fans and all of that type of thing. He showboated a bit too much, didn't he? Because he didn't get the results. So that's a bit boring, having to play snooker sometimes, isn't it? But you do get a good old chat, don't you? So these days I find myself watching the Stephen Henry channel. There's all sorts of guys on. It's brilliant. Jimmy White's always great value, isn't he? Like, Stephen Henry's a very likeable guy, I find, as well. But Jimmy White's good, like, he's good crack. He's very well respected, I find. Jimmy White. Say there's two presenters on a show, and you've got White and you've got O'Sullivan. Well, O'Sullivan, White was his hero, all of these little things. It's interesting to note these things. The dynamics, it's interesting for little nerds like me, aficionados and stuff like that. So, I prefer pool. I was helping sort of run a poetry course, like troubled youths. At one point on the pool table, you could just play on it, every day. Like you get about 5 games a day. Like we tournaments, winter stays on, what have you. Some of the players were really, really good. Because they were never out of this poetry course for some reason. Despite a complete lack of ability and grammar and spelling and stuff. I don't know, they were into rap. I suppose. So they had the passion for it, and I might have wrote the best poem some of those days, but usually I got whipped at the pool. Tell you what, though, if you're playing 5 games a day, you start climbing those levels, don't you? So anyway, be good, everybody. I'm gonna go watch Alex Higgins stuff, Ray Reardon, and then 1972. Oh, it's not the World Cup, sure it's not. World Championship, yeah, black and white probably. You know, you see how these guys turn out. Not punch drunk.